Think about the last time you were genuinely surprised by an idea. Not the mild, pleasant surprise of encountering a fact you did not previously know, but the deeper, more unsettling kind of surprise. The kind that makes you sit back and feel, for a moment, that something you had taken completely for granted about the way things work is suddenly open to question. Think about the last time a conversation left you genuinely changed, rather than simply confirmed in positions you already held. Think about the last time you pursued a line of inquiry, not because it was useful, not because it was professionally relevant, not because someone told you it was important, but simply because something in it pulled at you with the specific, restless pull of genuine curiosity. If you are struggling to remember, that difficulty is itself the answer to the question this video is asking. Because genuine curiosity, the specific quality of open, restless, not yet concluded engagement with the world that children maintain naturally, and that most adults lose so gradually they never notice it happening, is not simply a personality trait or a style of engagement. Carl Jung considered it one of the primary expressions of psychic health, a direct indicator of the degree to which the libido, the general life energy animating the whole psychological system, is flowing freely rather than being dammed up and stagnated in the fixed channels of habit, assumption, and the comfortable certainty of already knowing. A mind that has stopped being genuinely curious has not simply become less interesting. It has begun to rust. And like physical rust, the process is invisible in its early stages, accumulates gradually, and by the time it becomes obvious, it has already done considerably more damage than it appeared to when it first became noticeable. The specific symptom pattern of the rusting mind is worth describing carefully, because it is so easily misattributed to external causes, to busyness, to stress, to the ordinary demands of a full life, that most people never identify it correctly as a psychological condition requiring a psychological response. The person whose mind is rusting tends to find that what used to feel stimulating now feels merely familiar. Conversations that once generated genuine ideas now tend to recycle known positions. Books that once opened new territory now feel less urgently needed. The experience of genuine surprise, of encountering something that actually shifts one's understanding of something, becomes increasingly rare and increasingly notable precisely because it is so much less frequent than it once was. Perhaps most tellingly, the person with a rusting mind tends to find that their relationship to uncertainty has changed, that they experience the not yet known less as an invitation and more as a discomfort to be resolved as quickly as possible, to be answered or dismissed rather than genuinely inhabited. This shift in the relationship to uncertainty is, in Jung's framework, one of the most reliable indicators of libido stagnation, because genuine curiosity is fundamentally a relationship with productive uncertainty, a willingness to live in the question rather than rushing toward the answer that closes the question down. They feel, instead, a kind of low-grade dimness, a slight reduction in the vividness of experience, a faint sense that the world has become somewhat repetitive and somewhat less surprising than it once was, that conversations tend to cover the same ground, that days tend to follow the same arc, that the future seems like a relatively predictable extension of the present, rather than a domain of possibility. This dimness is so ordinary, so widely shared among adults in the middle decades of life, that it is rarely identified as a symptom of anything. It is simply accepted as the way things are, as what adulthood feels like compared to the more vivid, more surprising, more openly receptive experience of childhood. Jung did not accept this. He considered the stagnation of genuine curiosity not as an inevitable feature of adult maturity, but as one of the most common and most treatable expressions of what he called psychic stagnation, the condition in which the flow of libido has been interrupted, not by any single traumatic event, but by the accumulated effect of countless small choices to stay within the known, to reinforce the already held, to protect the existing structure of understanding from the discomfort of genuine encounter with what challenges or expands it. And he considered the restoration of genuine curiosity, the deliberate reopening of the psyche's receptive capacity to what it does not yet know and cannot yet predict, as one of the most reliable routes available to anyone willing to do the work of recovering the specific quality of aliveness. That psychic stagnation progressively diminishes. This video is going to trace that argument through its full depth. We will examine Jung's understanding of libido as life energy and the specific mechanism by which the cessation of genuine curiosity interrupts its flow. We will look at the neuroscience of curiosity, which has developed enormously in recent decades and which confirms, with considerable precision, what Jung observed clinically about the relationship between open inquiry and psychological health. We will bring in the philosophical tradition, specifically Aristotle's claim that all humans by nature desire to know, and Socrates' identification of the unexamined life as one not worth living. And we will trace the specific psychological mechanism by which the examined life that both Aristotle and Socrates were pointing toward requires, as its most basic condition, the maintenance of genuine curiosity rather than the completion of a fixed body of knowledge. We will look at the specific modern conditions, the information saturation, the algorithmic narrowing, the social pressure toward confident certainty, that make genuine curiosity structurally more difficult to maintain than at any previous point in human history. And we will examine what Jung's framework suggests about how to counteract these conditions. And we will arrive at a set of concrete, practically applicable practices for reversing the rusting of the mind, for restoring the flow of genuine curiosity, and for recovering, through that restoration, something considerably more valuable than mere intellectual interest, the specific, irreplaceable quality of felt aliveness that genuine curiosity, when it is present, reliably produces. Jung's concept of libido provides the theoretical foundation for understanding why the cessation of genuine curiosity is a psychological problem rather than simply a social or intellectual one. Libido, for Jung, is not simply sexual energy in Freud's narrow sense, but the general life energy animating all psychological activity, the fundamental moving principle of the psyche that manifests across an enormous range of human activities and interests, from creative work to spiritual experience to the specific quality of engaged, forward-leaning interest in what is not yet known that we call curiosity. This energy, Jung observed, has a specific characteristic that makes the stagnation of curiosity particularly costly. It does not simply pause when its forward flow is interrupted. It backs up. It accumulates. And accumulated libido that cannot find a forward channel of expression tends, over time, to express itself through whatever channels are available, which are not always the ones we would choose. Unexplained fatigue, a faint but persistent irritability, the specific quality of restlessness that cannot be satisfied by any of the things that previously provided satisfaction, an increasing difficulty finding genuine interest in activities that should, by any objective measure, be engaging. These are all recognizable expressions of damned libido, and they are all, in Jung's framework, symptoms of the same underlying condition, a psyche whose forward-moving energy has lost access to the channel of genuine curiosity and is accumulating behind the dam of habit and assumed knowledge. Jung was particularly attentive to the way this stagnation often accelerated in the second half of life, in the period he associated with the midlife crisis and with what he called the calling of the second half. He observed that many people who had been genuinely curious and genuinely alive in their 20s and 30s, driven by the forward-moving energy of establishing themselves in the world, building careers, forming relationships, acquiring competence in their chosen domains, arrived in their 40s and 50s with a specific and bewildering sense of flatness that no external addition to their lives seemed able to address. They had, by any conventional measure, succeeded. They had accomplished what they set out to accomplish. And yet something essential was missing, something that the accomplishment itself had not delivered, and that no further accumulation of similar accomplishments seemed likely to deliver. Jung's diagnosis of this condition was precise. What was missing was not more success, but genuine curiosity. The willingness to ask genuinely open questions about what the second half of life was actually for. Questions that the momentum of the first half had successfully deferred, and that, deferred long enough, had begun to feel dangerous or destabilizing rather than simply interesting. The neuroscience of curiosity has, in the decades since Jung's clinical observations, provided a biological substrate for exactly the dynamic he described. Research on the curious state of mind has found that genuine curiosity, characterized by the open, exploratory, not yet concluded quality that distinguishes it from mere information seeking, activates a specific pattern of neural engagement that is both broader and deeper than the neural engagement produced by familiar or confirming information. Curious exploration activates the dopaminergic reward system, the same system involved in motivation and the anticipation of reward, but in a specifically exploratory mode that is distinct from the reward produced by known pleasures. The brain in genuine curiosity is not simply registering reward. It is generating forward-moving energy, the biological equivalent of what Jung called libido in its forward-flowing state. And research consistently finds that this exploratory activation mode is associated with better encoding of new information, more creative and flexible problem-solving, greater emotional resilience, and a significantly higher subjective sense of vitality and meaning. The neuroscientist Karan Ranganathan, whose research has specifically focused on the neuroscience of memory and curiosity, has documented a finding particularly relevant to Jung's framework. His research shows that information encountered in a state of genuine curiosity is encoded more deeply and retained more durably than information encountered in a state of neutral or disengaged reception. And crucially, that the curious state also enhances the encoding of incidental information not directly related to the object of curiosity, but encountered in the same cognitive context. In other words, genuine curiosity does not simply improve the acquisition of specific targeted information. It improves the quality of the mind's entire engagement with its environment during the period in which it is active. A curious mind is, in a quite literal and measurable sense, a more alive mind, more thoroughly engaged with what is actually present, more capable of noticing and retaining what is genuinely significant. When genuine curiosity is absent, when the mind operates primarily in confirmation mode, processing familiar information through established frameworks without the disruptive openness of genuine inquiry, this specific pattern of exploratory neural activation is largely missing. The brain is receiving input and producing output, but the specific quality of energized, forward-leaning engagement that the curious state generates is replaced by a more routine, more mechanical processing that is efficient in a narrow sense, but that lacks the generative, vitalizing quality of genuine exploration. Over time, a mind that operates predominantly in confirmation mode rather than curiosity mode undergoes something that looks, at the neural level, remarkably similar to what physical disuse does to a body. The neural pathways most associated with exploratory engagement become less readily activated. The tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity, which genuine curiosity requires, and which it also develops, diminishes. The range of inputs and associations the mind spontaneously considers when encountering a problem narrows. The mind becomes, in a precise and measurable sense, less flexible, less generative, and less capable of the kind of open-ended engagement with novelty that genuine curiosity, both requires and produces. Aristotle's opening line of the Metaphysics, which has been translated and retranslated for 2.5 millennia, but which consistently begins with some version of the claim that all human beings by nature desire to know, provides the philosophical anchor point for understanding why the cessation of this desire is experienced as a loss of something essential rather than simply as a change in preference. For Aristotle, the desire to know is not a culturally specific value or a personality trait that some people happen to have and others do not. It is a fundamental feature of human nature, as basic as the desire for food or for connection. When it is suppressed, or when it atrophies through disuse, something genuinely essential to the human person is missing. And the specific quality of flourishing that Aristotle called eudaimonia, which is not simply happiness in the hedonic sense, but a deeper, more comprehensive sense of living in full accord with one's own nature, becomes correspondingly inaccessible. Socrates' identification of the unexamined life as not worth living takes this a step further. Socrates was not simply arguing that the examined life is more interesting or more ethically productive, though he believed both of these things. He was making a stronger claim about the specific relationship between genuine inquiry and genuine life, arguing that a life conducted entirely within the boundaries of what is already known, entirely within the comfort of assumptions, never challenged, and positions never genuinely questioned, is not simply a lesser life, but is in some meaningful sense not fully a life at all, because it lacks the specific quality of genuine encounter with the reality that genuine questioning produces. What the mind examines, it genuinely meets. What it merely confirms, it merely passes through. Jung's concept of the individuation process, his term for the lifelong project of psychological integration and growth, depends entirely on the maintenance of genuine curiosity, both about the outer world and, most urgently, about the inner world of one's own psyche. The fundamental activity of individuation is the encounter with what is not yet known about oneself, the willingness to meet honestly and with open attention the aspects of one's own psychology that habit and assumption and the comfortable self-image have successfully kept out of direct view. This encounter is not possible without genuine curiosity. A person who has lost the capacity for open, not yet concluded engagement with the unfamiliar cannot do the work of shadow integration, because shadow integration requires exactly the quality of receptive, non-defensive openness to what one does not expect to find that genuine curiosity provides. The rusting of the mind is, in Jung's framework, not simply an intellectual impoverishment. It is a direct obstacle to the most important psychological work available to a human being. The specific modern conditions that accelerate the rusting of the mind deserve particular examination, because they are so embedded in the ordinary infrastructure of contemporary life that they are rarely recognized as the specific threats to genuine curiosity that they actually are. The first and perhaps most pervasive of these is information saturation, the condition in which the sheer volume of available information so consistently exceeds the capacity to genuinely process and integrate it that the mind develops, as a coping mechanism, the habit of skimming rather than engaging, of acquiring surface familiarity with an enormous range of topics rather than deep, genuinely transformative acquaintance with any. A mind that has spent years acquiring surface familiarity rather than genuine depth begins to mistake familiarity for understanding. It begins to feel, when it encounters a topic it has skimmed before, that it already knows enough, which is precisely the feeling that genuine curiosity cannot coexist with. Genuine curiosity requires the specific quality of not yet knowing, of having real questions rather than surface answers. And a mind habituated to surface acquisition finds this quality increasingly difficult to access. The second modern condition is algorithmic, narrowing, the specific mechanism by which the digital platforms, through which most people now consume, Most of their information are designed to deliver more of what the user has previously engaged with and less of what challenges, surprises, or genuinely disrupts the existing framework of understanding. The algorithmic filter bubble is not simply a political phenomenon. It is a curiosity killer. A mind whose information diet is increasingly determined by its own prior preferences and reactions is a mind that is being systematically protected from the specific kind of encounter with the genuinely unfamiliar, genuinely challenging, and genuinely disruptive that genuine curiosity requires and produces. The algorithm that keeps you engaged is not the same algorithm that keeps you curious. And confusing engagement with curiosity is one of the more consequential confusions available in the contemporary information landscape. The third modern condition is the social pressure toward confident certainty, the specific cultural norm that treats uncertainty as weakness, the admission of not knowing as a failure of competence, and the willingness to hold a question open without forcing premature closure as an indulgence of the uncommitted. In many contemporary professional and social contexts, expressing genuine uncertainty about a topic is experienced as a liability rather than as the honest and intellectually appropriate response to genuine complexity. The norm is confidence, and confidence requires, or at least appears to require, the kind of settled, already concluded knowledge that genuine curiosity specifically disrupts. A person navigating a social environment that rewards confident certainty and penalizes honest uncertainty has a strong incentive, whether or not they are consciously aware of it, to arrive at settled conclusions faster than the genuine complexity of most important questions warrants, which means shutting down the genuine inquiry process earlier than genuine understanding would require. Mythology, which Jung considered the language through which the collective unconscious encodes the deepest wisdom available to human experience, offers several images for the relationship between curiosity and life, and between the cessation of curiosity and a specific kind of living death. The figure of the Fisher King in the Grail legend is perhaps the most precise mythological image available for the condition we have been describing. The Fisher King is wounded, specifically wounded in his generative capacity, and as a result of his wound, his kingdom has become a wasteland, a domain of stagnation, diminishment, and the absence of growth. The wound that has produced this wasteland is the specific wound of a king who has lost the capacity to ask the right question. Specifically, the question that the Grail legend identifies as the healing question, the question simply of what ails thee. The wasteland is not the result of any specific evil action. It is the result of the failure to genuinely inquire, of the failure to ask, openly and without predetermined answers, what is actually wrong. The restoration of the land in the Grail legend does not come through conquest or through magical intervention. It comes through the willingness of the knight Parsifal to finally ask the question that the Fisher King needed someone to ask him, directly, genuinely, without strategic purpose. The question itself is the healing. The genuine inquiry is the restoration. The myth of Prometheus adds another dimension that is worth including here, though it is less often read through the lens of curiosity than through the lens of transgression and punishment. Prometheus, who steals fire from the gods and gives it to humanity, is doing precisely what genuine curiosity does in the psychological domain, bringing into the human world something that previously existed only in a domain considered too elevated, too dangerous, or too sacred for ordinary access. The punishment of Prometheus, chained to a rock while an eagle daily devours his liver, which regenerates each night to be consumed again, is the mythological image of what happens to the genuinely curious person in a culture that has decided that certain questions should not be asked, certain domains should not be explored, certain fire should not be brought down from the heights. It is also, in psychological terms, an image of the specific torment of the person whose genuine curiosity has been suppressed. The continuous regeneration of the desire to know that is continuously thwarted by whatever has chained it to the rock of habit and assumption. The fire that Prometheus brought was not comfortable. It changed everything. And genuine curiosity, the psychological fire that lights the interior, carries the same quality of disruptive, transformative. Cannot dash be dash put dash back dash in dash the box potential that the Promethean myth encodes. The story of Sleeping Beauty, which Bruno Bettelheim analyzed as a coming-of-age myth, and which Jung would have read as an image of the arrested individuation process, carries a related insight. The entire kingdom falls asleep, frozen in the exact moment of its arrested development, not through any external catastrophe, but through the specific mechanism of a curse that prevents genuine encounter with what was avoided. In this case, the 13th wise woman, the excluded and dangerous principle, the shadow that was not invited to the feast. The kingdom wakes not through being rescued from the outside, but through the arrival of the one who is willing to make the journey through the thicket of thorns that the avoidance has grown, to enter the sleeping castle and make genuine contact with what has been frozen there. This contact, this genuine encounter, is itself the waking. The curiosity to make the journey is the beginning of the restoration, a concrete case study from everyday, professional and personal experience makes the abstract dynamic visible in immediate terms. Consider two people who entered the same professional field at the same time, with roughly equivalent starting knowledge and roughly equivalent initial curiosity about the domain they were entering. After 10 years, one of them has continued to be genuinely curious about the field, consistently seeking out the edges of their knowledge, the places where the established frameworks do not quite fit the evidence, the questions that the field has not yet adequately answered. The other has, over the same 10 years, become highly competent within the established frameworks, accumulating expertise and efficiency, but progressively, losing active contact with the genuine uncertainty of the field's frontiers, the places where real questions still exist and where genuine inquiry would be rewarded. After 20 years, the first person is still growing, still capable of genuine surprise, still capable of producing genuinely original contributions to their field. The second person is more experienced, often more externally successful, but has reached a kind of plateau, a specific ceiling imposed not by the limits of their intelligence or their capacity, but by the specific limits of a mind that stopped being genuinely curious and has been operating ever since on the intellectual capital accumulated before the curiosity stopped. So what does genuine intellectual and psychological curiosity look like in practice? And how is it restored once it has begun to rust? The first practice is what might be called deliberate beginner's mind, the specific Zen concept of approaching familiar domains with the same open, not yet knowing receptivity that a genuine beginner brings to an unfamiliar one. This does not mean pretending not to know what you know. It means deliberately suspending the habit of arriving at familiar subjects with conclusions already formed, allowing yourself the specific quality of renewed encounter with things you thought you understood rather than simply confirming the understanding you arrived with. The practice of asking, "What am I missing here?" not as a rhetorical gesture, but as a genuine inquiry, is the simplest available expression of deliberate beginner's mind, and it consistently reveals something genuinely new in domains where the person performing the inquiry was certain there was nothing new to find. The second practice involves what Jung called crossing the threshold, the deliberate engagement with domains of knowledge, experience, or inquiry that lie outside the person's established area of competence and comfort. This does not require dramatic gestures. It requires only the consistent, disciplined habit of allocating a portion of one's intellectual and experiential attention to the genuinely unfamiliar, to the domain where one is not yet competent, not yet confident, not yet settled, and where genuine curiosity is therefore still naturally available because genuine not knowing has not yet been replaced by the comfortable assumption of already knowing. The engineer who reads poetry, the philosopher who learns to cook, the psychologist who studies mycology. Each of these crossings into genuine unfamiliarity is a restoration of the specific quality of not knowing that genuine curiosity requires. The third practice is what might be called the productive question, the deliberate cultivation of genuine, not yet answered questions, rather than the accumulation of answers. Most educated adults have become, through years of formal education, highly skilled at generating answers. They are considerably less skilled at generating questions, and specifically at tolerating the specific discomfort of a question that does not yet have an answer, and may not have one for some time. The practice of maintaining what the physicist Richard Feynman described as a list of his favorite problems, genuine open questions that he carried with him and that he tested every new piece of information against, is a precise and practically applicable form of what Jung would call maintaining the libido in its forward-flowing curiosity mode. What are your unanswered questions? Not the questions you are confident you will soon answer, but the ones that remain genuinely open, genuinely uncertain, genuinely alive with the specific quality of not yet known that genuine curiosity inhabits. The fourth practice is active imagination applied specifically to the domain of intellectual and experiential curiosity. In a quiet moment, allow yourself to follow a thread of genuine interest wherever it wants to go, without the constraint of usefulness, practicality, or professional relevance. This is the specific quality of what Winnicott called play, the mode of engagement with reality that is intrinsically motivated rather than instrumentally motivated, that proceeds by its own internal logic rather than toward a predetermined external goal. And that is, in Winnicott's framework and in Jung's, the most fundamental available expression of psychological health. A mind that can no longer play, that can no longer follow a line of genuine interest for its own sake, is a mind that has lost contact with something essential. And the restoration of this capacity is the restoration of something considerably more important than mere intellectual entertainment. The fifth practice is the cultivation of genuine intellectual humility, not the performed modesty of someone who says, "I don't know everything," while behaving as though they do, but the genuine, practiced willingness to hold one's existing frameworks lightly enough that new evidence can actually move them. This is, as the philosopher of science Karl Popper insisted, the foundational condition of genuine learning. A belief that cannot be falsified, that cannot be updated by evidence that contradicts it, is not a genuine piece of knowledge, but a fixed assumption masquerading as knowledge. Genuine curiosity requires the willingness to discover that what you believed was wrong, or incomplete, or only partially true, and to update accordingly rather than protecting the existing belief through motivated reasoning. This willingness is not natural. It must be practiced. But it is, in the most precise sense, the willingness that keeps the mind alive. The sixth and most Jungian practice is the extension of this intellectual curiosity inward, toward the specific domain of one's own psychic life. Jung observed that most people apply to their own inner world exactly the same incurious certainty that they apply to the outer world after the initial novelty of self-discovery has worn off. They arrive at a fixed self-narrative, a settled account of who they are, why they do what they do, and what they want, and then operate on this settled account as though it were a complete and accurate description rather than a partial, inevitably outdated map of a terrain that is continuously changing. The genuine curiosity directed inward, the willingness to approach one's own motivations, reactions, dreams, and patterns with the same open, not yet concluded receptivity that genuine curiosity brings to the outer world, is both the beginning of the individuation process and the most reliable route available for reversing the specific form of psychic stagnation that the rusting of the mind produces. There is a specific quality of felt experience that genuine curiosity produces that is worth describing directly, because it is, in the end, the most compelling reason available for doing the work of restoring it when it has begun to diminish. When genuine curiosity is present, the world has a quality that no other psychological state quite replicates. Things matter in a forward-leaning way. The next moment contains something that is not yet fully determined. The territory ahead is genuinely uncharted rather than a predictable extension of the territory behind. This quality is not simply intellectual excitement. It is closer to what Jung meant by aliveness, the specific feeling of a psyche whose libido is flowing freely, whose attention is genuinely engaged with what is actually present, rather than with the management of a fixed and fully determined inner world. It is the feeling, familiar from childhood and recoverable in adulthood, of being genuinely interested in what happens next. The rusting mind does not feel this. It feels, instead, the faint, familiar dimness we described at the beginning, the sense that the world has become somewhat smaller and somewhat more predictable than it once was, that days are more similar to each other than they used to be, that the future is basically the present with minor variations. This is not simply an external condition. It is a psychological one, and it is reversible. Not instantly, not through a single dramatic intervention, but through the patient, consistent, genuinely motivated practice of returning, again and again, to the specific quality of open, restless, not yet concluded attention that genuine curiosity provides, and that the human mind, whatever its age, however long it has been running on the narrowing channels of habit and assumption, retains the capacity to recover. Your mind is rusting. Jung would say this is not a statement about your intelligence, your character, or your worth. It is a statement about a specific, correctable condition in the flow of your psychic energy. The rust is not permanent. The flow can be restored, but it requires, as its first and most essential condition, the one thing that the rusted mind is most reluctant to provide, the genuine willingness to not already know. There is a paradox worth naming directly at the close of this video, because it is one of the more counterintuitive features of the dynamic we have been describing. The person whose mind is most thoroughly rusted, who has most completely settled into the comfortable certainty of already knowing, tends to feel the most secure in their understanding of themselves and the world. They have, in a sense, succeeded at something, at the project of arriving at a stable, coherent, fully settled account of reality that requires no further genuine questioning. But this security is the specific security of the oyster, not the security of the pearl. It is the security of a system that has closed itself against further growth in order to protect what has already been accumulated. And what it accumulates, over time, in exchange for this security, is precisely the dimness, the flatness, the faint but persistent sense of something missing, that this video has been describing from its opening paragraph. The alternative is not the insecurity of not knowing anything. It is the specific, grounded, forward-leaning security of a mind that knows how to hold its knowledge lightly enough that new knowledge can still arrive, that has developed enough tolerance for genuine uncertainty that it can live productively in the questions it cannot yet answer, and that has maintained, through deliberate practice and genuine commitment, the specific quality of open, restless, not yet concluded attention that genuine curiosity provides. This is the security of a mind that is still alive, and it is available to anyone willing to do the specific, modest, genuinely possible work of allowing themselves, one more time, to genuinely not know.